There are a lot of controllers that revolutionized video gaming. The addition of the direction pad was seen as a leap forward from the Atari 2600 joystick and Intellivision telephone design. It revolutionized it so much that it's really hard to think of a modern first-party controller without one. Then you have motion controllers, which aim to reduce the amount of buttons needed for input and immerse the gamer and enhance the experience. The Wii definitely showed that it was possible to build a system around them and produce an enjoyable experience at the same time. But what about motion controls leading up to it? I've already reviewed the Power Glove, which uses gestures to perform actions in a variety of NES games, but one thing that I never had as a kid was the Uforce from Broderbund. The Uforce is a controller that uses infrared sensors to determine where your hands are on this playing field, and depending on where those hands are and what motions are performed, that will translate into hitting the A, B, or directional pad. The box bills it as the only accessory you'll ever need, and states that you can actually be part of every game you play. It's so realistic. Just how realistic is the Uforce? Let's take a look. The first impressions of this controller is that it's an unassuming piece of gray plastic, similar in design to the NES itself. The Uforce folds in half for easy storage to protect the field sensor from getting ruined. There is a start and select button on the left side of the controller, and on the right side are 6 switches. The 2 black switches are turbo options for A and B inputs. The game switches tell the Uforce which game that you're playing, and there are 6 modes. Mode A is for games like Galaga, Ikari Warriors, and Legend of Zelda. Mode B is used almost exclusively for Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. Mode C is for Rad Racer. Mode D is for Excitebike. Mode E is for games like Donkey Kong and Super Mario Bros. And finally, Mode F, which states that it's used for future games designed specifically for the Uforce, which, as far as I can tell, there aren't any retail releases. The closest that I found was the Retro B Uforce game compilation, which is no longer for sale. In addition to the game switches, the Uforce needs to be configured in a certain way, either upright or flat. Being flat isn't 100% necessary, as the manual states that Mode E games can also be played in Mode A if you so choose. In addition to the controller, the Uforce also comes with 2 add-ons that sit on this little divot on the bottom. You have the power bar, which is used for Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, and a T-bar, which is a yoke similar to what you'd find in an airplane. There are 2 triggers on the top of the T-bar that, when pressed, turn these little flaps on the bottom, which the Uforce interprets as A or B. While the T-bar isn't necessary to play games, the power bar is required for use with Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. The controller will not recognize when you move your hands away from it, so you can duck properly. Sadly, it is kind of difficult to find all of the pieces for the Uforce nowadays, and luckily I was able to get a complete in-box version with all the pieces for a reasonable price. Now you have a brief overview of the controllers, so now let's dive into the games. I'm going to use the games recommended by the Uforce manual, since that will give the most accurate experience. Let's start out with Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. I got the power bar in the Uforce, the switches are set, and the controller is in the upright seated position. So let's go. When you're playing this for the first time, your instinct might be to move really fast with a wide range of motions, and you'll find really quick that the input from the Uforce might not translate directly to the NES in time. And what you'll need to do is make sure that your punches match the speed of the game itself. You'll notice that Little Mac tends to throw his punches fairly slow in the grand scheme of things, so you'll want to match it to that. Realizing that makes the game much easier to react to the punches. I was able to take down Glass Joe and Von Kaiser after a bit of practice, and one thing I found difficult was performing a star attack, which is done by pressing the start button. This means that you have to take your hand off of the grid and press that button. Then you need to make sure that your hands are reset on the grid to make sure that your punches land. I'm sure with a lot of practice I could take on the Champ, but it's easier to use than the Power Glove and harder to use than a traditional controller. Now on to Top Gun. This game can be played with the T-bar or without, but I'm only going to show with the T-bar. One of the things that I liked about the T-bar is that after you get used to controlling games this way, it's really fluid. Like Punch-Out, you want to be careful about moving too far out of range of the sensors, which will break the gameplay. The learning curve is definitely steeper with this method than with Punch-Out, and there are some nuances with the control scheme that make the game dramatically more difficult than using the original controller. Moving left to right and down and up need to be much more deliberate, and in some cases doesn't feel as responsive as Punch-Out. And forget trying to land the plane with this thing. I tried 3 times and each time I couldn't speed up or down fast enough before crashing into the water. And it's probably due to the fact that the flaps on the bottom of the button grips don't go fully back to black, which can cause some erroneous input. And also moving left to right causes the grips to move away from the sensors. If you don't want to use the T-bar, you can detach the grips from it and use them freely, but this will increase the chances that you'll move the grips away from the sensors. I didn't try this since the instruction manual said that it would be even more difficult than using the T-bar. Now I'm trying Rad Racer with the T-bar and it's simple enough, however it does feel more clunky than an original controller. The difference between this and Top Gun is that there's less to do and it makes it a little bit easier. And now the most difficult game that I've tried with the Uforce is Super Mario Bros. The control scheme on this one has you lay the Uforce flat with the start and select buttons to the right. Moving your hands over certain sensors on the left will move Mario right to left, and the sensors on the right will have Mario jump. Now this is crazy hard to get the hang of simply because you need to jump and run at the same time, and Mario Bros. Requires precision that the Uforce just doesn't have when you're first starting out. I was able to get to level 1-2 after a couple of game overs, and getting good at Mario Bros. With the Uforce can be done, but it's going to come down to how much frustration you can handle before you can become halfway decent. And that's really the type of audience that the Uforce is for. Remember that episode of That 70s Show where Kelso mods Red's Pong machine to get smaller paddles because he needs a challenge? Well, that's what the Uforce aims to do, provide a new challenge to familiar games. Even the first page of the manual states that you're not going to be a champion with the Uforce right away. The controller works, that's for sure. It isn't as intuitive as the standard control pad that came with the Nintendo Entertainment System, which is why it didn't see mass adoption. But in an age where achievements to bring new life to games didn't exist, the Uforce filled that gap to add a challenge to games where people might be looking to spice it up a little bit. I wouldn't really recommend the Uforce if you want a carefree way to play Nintendo games, but if you really want a challenge, then by all means grab one. And that wraps it up for the Uforce. Do you have one of these? Would you want to get one after this review? Let me know in the comments below, and if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you're new here, consider subscribing for future gaming content. I'm Super Nicktendo, and thanks for watching.